In a week when podcast hosts had to have family members tackle the most important haircut in press and cinema, full disclosure, I didn't break the lockdown rules, Zack Snyder's Justice League got a proper trailer, and the gods of video conferencing turned a lawyer into a kitten, what more would you want from a podcast than two blokes entering the realm of science fiction for the first time this series? Hello, wherever you're listening or watching, and welcome to the Rip Ticket Review, a film and TV podcast that has three main directives: educate the public on great movies, protect classic cinema from being rebooted, and uphold strong opinions. My name's TheJackSmit, and joining me over the power of the internet is the Verhoeven original to my particular reboot. Good afternoon, Dan Carver.
Good afternoon, Jack. I think we failed on the second directive before we even said it, because this has already been rebooted.
Yeah, I mean,
RoboCop.
I again, it was kind of a chore getting a decent intro, but yeah.
Yeah, and I might briefly touch on that about RoboCop, the reboot. But no, we're talking about RoboCop, the original, a film that is still brilliant to this day. And then Jack admitted something shocking and horrific to me about this movie. Jack, would you like to share your sins with the audience?
Well, if you insist, as part of the preparation for this podcast, I watched this movie for the very first time last week, because anyone who's read the blog over the last 8 years I've been running it knows that movies that have excessive violence aren't ones that I genuinely watch. But then, knowing that we were going to be doing an episode on RoboCop, I thought, well, it's about time I watch this film, and I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did.
Good. Excellent. That's really good to hear. Yeah, I get you on the excessive violence. I can think of several movies that are just so excessively violent. The last Rambo film that came out was really violent, and that was... So I kind of get you on this one. But yeah, RoboCop, I can't believe you've never watched it before. It is... I think it's one of those movies where if you're getting into film, you really need to watch it. And if you're getting into film scripting and storyboarding and basically crafting a really good, tight science fiction film, RoboCop should be your go-to movie, because it's that brilliant. I mean, I'm looking at the poster right now. Part man, part machine, all cop. What a tagline.
And what a great poster as well. I could easily see that in cinema foyers up and down the land in 87 when the film came out.
Yeah, and it's such a great movie. It's so great that in 1987, September the 16th, there is a news article from AP News, and I'll read it out to you. A robbery suspect who fled into a theatre to escape police became so engrossed in the movie RoboCop that he failed to notice that police were evacuating all the patrons behind his front row seat. True story. It was a robbery suspect who went into the theatre to escape from the police. He went into the gents' toilets after buying the ticket to RoboCop, flushed some stained money, and went into the cinema. He was so engrossed with the movie that when the lights came up, he realised that everyone behind him had been evacuated and there was no one but police there. He got taken into custody.
Oh, what? That is a great story, that. You don't get much of that working in cinema nowadays.
You don't know. Prior to the release as well, the Hollywood was so hyped for this that there were actors wearing fiberglass replicas of RoboCop's costumes, and they could be spotted in malls and major cities throughout the United States and Canada. And RoboCops were also spotted as well at an auto race in Florida. And one RoboCop was even spotted at a Madonna concert. China, I think, has a real fascination with RoboCop, because I think they had some RoboCop chicken commercials, which you can watch on YouTube. I don't know if it was linked to KFC or not. Obviously, other brands are available.
Other brands available, yeah.
So I don't know if it's that link, but if you watch it, you'll see that there are so many RoboCop adverts that are aimed, that with kids in. It's crazy. And as well as that, Richard Tricky Dicky Nixon was recruited to help promote the RoboCop home video. He plugged the tape in return for $25,000, in which he donated to the American Boys Club. That's $25,000 to plug the tape. That's how, this movie's got such a story to it.
It's a proper cultural movement. It's become a proper cultural movement since it came out.
I wouldn't say it was a cultural movement. It's
it spawned the franchise. It got the franchise.
it got the franchise going. It's definitely made ripples in the cyberpunk movement because there are elements of cyberpunk in this film. But we'll start from the beginning.
Yeah.
So, RoboCop, 1987. It's an American science fiction action film directed by Paul Verhoeven.
The man who would,
well known.
Yeah, he'd go on to make Basic Instinct, one of the films.
Instinct,
yeah,
Total Recall. He made Showgirls, but we don't talk about.
We don't talk of Showgirls, no.
Before this, of course, he had trademarks. His trademark was blending graphic violence, sexual content with social satire, which were all hallmarks of his films. See Total Recall and Basic Instinct.
Oh yeah, Basic Instinct, aka the film that got an entire Talking Smit About Film episode blocked from YouTube.
Damn, that's understandable. It's the movie itself. It stars Peter Weller as Alex Murphy, who, along with his partner, attempts to apprehend some bank robbers. It all goes horribly wrong. Alex Murphy is summarily executed by these bank robbers, and his body is brought back to life in the shell of a robot suit, and he becomes property of Omni Consumer Products, OCP, as he is reborn as RoboCop, the next step in fighting crime. And a word to the warning, if you've not watched this movie, stop watching this now. Go watch the movie. We are going to spoil the jeebus out of this movie.
Well, you say that after last week, I have the button. So for those of you who are going into this with a side of caution, a word of warning. Spoilers incoming! There we are.
There we go.
Game prepared.
So, brilliant. Yep, it was made of a budget of 13.7 million, made 53 million in the box office. And it runs at a very tight 102 minutes. It doesn't feel like 102 minutes at all.
It really didn't. It really didn't.
Yeah, you watch the movie and it's so perfectly paced. There are no subplots that are out of place, no scenes that have no purpose. Every frame has a purpose in this movie. Yeah. So we open up with one of many we open up in the movie with one of many cutaways, because one of the things that the movie does really well is the social satire of America, and it does this with cutaways, fake TV adverts, and of course that brilliant line, "I'd buy that for $1," which is a running gag. The cutaways, there's Media Watch, which is at that point your generic news channel where you have two news anchors speaking with all smiles whilst they are going on about what's happening in the world.
And it's all good.
The world building.
Yeah, the juxtaposition of those news segments, going to get a little advert splice in between. That's a good little bit of exposition setting. Good little introduction to this futuristic Detroit that we get to know really well over the course of 1 hour 42 minutes. When I watched it on Thursday, I was like, this is a very smart way of doing your world building. I wish more films could go down this route, because if anything, it doesn't bore you. You get big, heavy news subjects going, oh yeah, you got a funny little advert in between. Why? It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect way of doing your world building.
It really is. We learn that the city of Detroit in the near future is on the brink of societal and financial collapse. It's overwhelmed by crime. The police are dwindling, and so it grants the mega corporation Omni Consumer Products, OCP, control over the Detroit police force. The world building that we get in the first 20 minutes of the film, with the opening board scene where they're introducing Ed 209, which is the first idea for automated law enforcement. It's just such a brilliant opening scene. We see, the board of OCP, Daniel O'Hara playing the old man who is the chief executive of OCP. Ronnie Cox as Dick Jones, the senior vice president, who is introducing the Ed 209 as he watches it blow away the poor hapless Kenny, There's a South Park joke in there, but
Oh
I'm
my
too good for it.
Oh my God, they killed Kenny.
There's a South Park joke in there. As it blows apart Kenny, reducing him to pulp on this future model of Delta City, which is the old man's dream. He wants to demolish Detroit City, turn it into Delta City, the only consumer products owned city, the safest place on earth. And you immediately sort of get the social satire there, as the reaction of the old man tells you everything you need to know about OCP when he's put his head in his hand and he looks at Dick Jones, played by Ronnie Cox, and he just goes, "Dick, I'm very disappointed in you." And Dick Jones is like, "It's just a glitch."
Yeah.
And of course, the old man is looking at the pulped body. He's like, "You call this a glitch? It's going to cost us millions." Straight off the bat, the social satire just comes in. And then, of course, you've got Miguel Ferrer, who plays Bob Morton, who is the OCP junior executive who swoops in and lets the old man know about the RoboCop project, which is, the name of the project, which is title of the movie,
which would change the face of Detroit police forces forever when it would get introduced by chance, and we'll get onto that a little bit later on.
Well, yeah, exactly. Now, like I said, the movie is 102 minutes. The pacing is absolutely brilliant. If you are looking to do tight scripts and you want to learn how to do proper scripts with no filler,
all filler, no killer.
Action, that's it. No filler, all killer, I'd say.
Oh yeah, other way around.
Yeah, then you need to watch this movie. It is absolutely brilliant. It's been, the film itself has got themes of, it examines nature of humanity, personal identity, corporate greed, corruption, and it does all that in just under 100, just over 100 minutes,
just over an hour 40, which is incredible.
Well, 102 minutes, and what I love about this film is that it never spoon feeds you the messages.
Yeah.
Spoon feed you them at all. Like, one of the things that really did my nutting about the RoboCop reboot was that Gary Oldman was just playing Professor Exposition as he was spoon feeding everything to the audience and talking about it's nature versus nurture, and it's just like, Gary, come on, man, we know this. We're not dumb. RoboCop is one of those movies where it's this loud, brilliant social satire. It's dumb in places, but it knows it's dumb. I mean, the title of the movie.
It tells you everything. That title tells you everything.
It takes itself seriously, but not too seriously, as you can see in the adverts and the complete and utter craziness of the news cycles, as you have these two news anchors smiling as they're talking about an out-of-control satellite annihilating part of America by accident. The performances during those moments do offer a little bit of brevity, and it shows that the movie doesn't take itself too seriously when it doesn't need to. It's brilliant. I mean, Jack, going into this movie, what were your thoughts on it?
Well, my thoughts going into this movie, obviously I mentioned the whole aspect of the violence, but then I watch this movie and I see that lead performance, and he mentioned the script as well. One of the things that really took me by surprise during the research of this episode was the fact that when the writers, who are two guys by the name of Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner, they came up with the idea working on the set of Blade Runner. They managed to weasel their way onto the set of Blade Runner, and I can see the influence that movie had. What RoboCop does in an hour and 42, and I feel like I'm going to get hounded for saying this, does everything that Blade Runner wished it could have done in 2 hours, but does it better.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment to make. Now, obviously, when you're talking about the making of the movie, some of the satirical moments do miss, and I think a lot of that has to do with Verhoeven not understanding the satirical content He actually passed on the script until his wife convinced him to take it up, and he did try to put his own bit of black humor in it. In the scene where Kenny is reduced to mash, essentially by Ed 209, there's one of the executives in the room goes, "Somebody call a paramedic." And I think that was Verhoeven's attempt at black humor, which is just like I see what you're trying
didn't work.
to do.
That line did not work.
No, it didn't, and you can tell that Verhoeven really struggled with some of the satirical moments in this. It would have probably been a bit more funnier if they were more concerned with, I don't know, oh my god, his brains are on my suit. Oh my god, he's destroyed the he's destroyed the model. Oh, and Kenny's dead. Oh my god, oh my god, think of the millions. It would have been a bit more, better. It's just an idea. I'm riffing ideas off the top of my head here, but what. But yeah, I'm glad that Verhoeven took upon this. So the movie itself is beautifully shot.
Oh yeah, I can agree with you on that one. The cinematography from Josh Vacano is just—it's one of the things about this movie that still holds up to this day. Even watching it on a relatively small screen, wish I could have watched it on the big screen. But the cinematography, the way it's all shot, executed, you got moments with that dark, gritty feel, but then you have the more vibrant, colourful moments where we're actually in the city, and the way they're able to tell this in two stories, both before and after the death of the man of Alex, who would eventually become RoboCop himself. Just the way that the amount of thought and the amount of detail that's gone into this movie, it's of its time, but my god, it still works all these years later. I'm surprised it took me this long to watch it, because I'm like, what have I missed out on all this time? I'm like, seriously, wow.
Well, we'll go into what happens after the movie if you want, but yeah. And another thing as well that really helps with the cinematography is the sound. The RoboCop theme is iconic.
Yes,
you have that mixture of classical instruments over the techno sort of drums banging, which is sort of symbolic of Alex Murphy, who he is as RoboCop. He's human, and that's where the wood instruments come in, and not the wood instruments, so the classical instruments come in of the RoboCop theme. But then, of course, he's a part machine as well, which is where the techno techno drums come in. It's brilliant. And speaking of Alex Murphy, Peter Weller, I cannot imagine anyone else as RoboCop. And we have had other people as RoboCop who have failed.
But this is the de facto RoboCop here. Gary Oldman might have done what he did in the 2014 reboot, but Peter Weller is RoboCop. Gary Oldman played the professor, the doctor in RoboCop. It was Joel Kinnaman who played RoboCop in the remake. And that tells you how forgettable the remake was.
It's very forgettable. But yeah, Weller spent months working on the movement of RoboCop. He originally he worked with a mime artist, Moni Yakin, and he worked months developing this sort of snake-like movement for RoboCop. And as he sort of imagined, the movements of this machine. But when Weller got into the suit, he realized, actually, my movements are rather limited. I can't do these snake-like movements. So he went back to Moni Yakin, and Moni Yakin was like, right, okay, instead of this snake-like movement that we're going for, let's go with a liquid movement style, but a stiff robotic movement for RoboCop. And that's how Weller came up, with the iconic movement for RoboCop. And it works. And it also works as well because you don't see Weller's face until about 3/4 of the way through the movie. It's all chin, and you don't see RoboCop's face. You see the face of Alex Murphy, but then he's hidden behind that visor when he becomes RoboCop until about 3/4 of the movie. And honestly, the performance that man puts from his chin alone, and the voice is just fan.
Puts Tom Hardy to shame. Puts Tom Hardy in that Bane mask to shame.
Really does. I mean, Carl, you can say what you want about Carl Urban and Dredd, but Weller did it first with RoboCop.
Yep.
And yeah, it was tough for Peter Weller because he spent months in that suit, months. We've also got as well Nancy Allen as Anne Lewis, who is the loyal police officer and partner to Alex Murphy, who begins to realize from RoboCop's mannerisms that actually who he truly is.
Because it's important to note that when he becomes RoboCop, he has his memory erased. So he doesn't remember much about himself. All he has in his mind are the 3 core directives. Well, the fourth is classified.
Prime directive.
The prime directive: serve the public trust, protect the innocent, and uphold the law. Those are all he does. It's only when he does his trademark gun flip that Anne realizes, it's actually Murphy here, and that's one of your main narrative driving forces of the film. Is he's learning more about his history as he upholds his duty. And I guess another one of the aspects of the script that really works so well, it's just like it builds and it builds and builds, and the moment when he realizes who he truly is, that is a moment and a half.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you're talking about the gun, one of the gun flips that Peter Weller's character does, that Alex Murphy does, and it's his trademark. And masculinity and authority is actually one of the main themes of RoboCop, because in the 1980s, cinematic heroes were unambiguously good. So you have films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future, that promoted these films promote these unwaveringly good heroes who were just perfect in every way. And in a sense, Alex Murphy is one of those heroes, and that's what allows him to transcend from the RoboCop self to, at the end of the movie, when he's asked what's his name by the old man, and RoboCop just turns and smiles and says Murphy, and that's all he needs to say. And the gun flip comes from a show called TJ Laser, which is the a sci-fi show, a kids show in Universe.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that TJ Laser harkens back to the sort of unwaveringly good guy science fiction character of kids shows, where they could just massacre the bad guys because he's the good guy. We kind of accept it, and he has that gun flip, which of course Alex Murphy takes for himself, because he's like, well, it's important for a kid to have a role model, and it's. And that's one of the things I love about this movie, is that gun flip. It just seems like a throwaway moment, but it's such an important part of the movie. The gun flip, where he just flips his gun at the end and puts it back. It's so ingrained into his consciousness that it breaks through from the RoboCop programming. And of course, his partner sees this, and Lewis sees this, and is like, "Oh, hang on a minute. That's a big clue of who he really is," and it's so brilliant.
I know.
Obviously, the biggest theme of this, I would say, is the theme of humanity and death. Now, there was a question aimed at a member of the RoboCop team in the movie, because there was this theory that RoboCop was kind of a retelling of the birth and death of Jesus, and they used examples of Alex Murphy spread out on the crucifix as he's being shot, and RoboCop walking on water, and the theory itself was shot down, and they just said, look, it was just coincidental. Which is fair enough. However, there are still themes of humanity and death. And the central theme here is, what is humanity, and how much of Murphy is still left in RoboCop? Where does Murphy end and RoboCop begin? Because you have those prime directives, don't you? Protect the innocent, uphold the law, serve the public trust. Directive 4, which is classified until the end, and it's. The audience is reading and left asking, what is left of Murphy? And we're given these little tidbits of Murphy, as he says, his Murphyisms, dead or alive, you're coming with me, flipping his gun, that sort of thing.
Yeah, And not importantly, when he does become RoboCop, the first person he takes out is the man who ultimately killed him. So there's that whole theme of with not just the humanity, but the actual doing right by himself and making sure that he's able to live the life that he wants to live, albeit not quite as he envisioned, but ultimately one in which he's able to do what he loves. And I think that's sort of compounded a little bit later on when he's at the school being braced by all the kids. It's like a role model, as we've mentioned, the whole role model. And that's one of the more powerful moments of the film, because it has the comic aspects of the film that played up. Because it's like, oh yeah, he's a robot, he's being mobbed by kids, he doesn't really speak to him that much. But ultimately, that figure has become so beloved within Detroit. It gives you an idea of the sort of status he's got within this universe that it's been depicted in just the space of one film. In the space of one film, a whole universe is built where people can add stuff to it, and that's the sign of good writing. That is the sign of good writing, when you can do 2 films worth of work in an hour and 40. That is genuinely impressive.
Yeah. Well, one of the most important scenes of the movie is the death of Alex Murphy. It is drawn out, it is long, it is violent, and it is done so that we can actually attach our own humanity to Alex Murphy, and we feel for him as he is brought back online as RoboCop. And as we watch, as these little bits of Alex Murphy's personality bleed into RoboCop, and the real Murphy comes through. Sorry, my throat is very dry, and I have to get some water.
Join the club.
But yeah, it's one of the most important scenes, and it works so well. The violence in this movie, it is one of the ways that the movie doesn't take itself too seriously. Because, like I say, there are many aspects of the movie that it doesn't take itself too seriously, and one of them is the violence. And the violence is used to help not only to show how gritty this world really is, but the violence is also used in Alex Murphy's execution to really connect with the character. That was something that I think lacked in the RoboCop reboot. In the RoboCop reboot, we just saw Alex Murphy blow up from a car bomb, and it was just over before it even began. It was just like, oh, okay, that happens.
Yeah, if you're gonna do that, you have to do it with style, and this is exactly what happens with the brilliant original, as I'm referring to it now, because ultimately with the violence in RoboCop, one of the things with production, the fact it was that violent made it difficult over in America to get the R rating. So originally it was going to get the NC-17, which meant it would have missed out on a lot of the target audience. However, us Brits were strong enough. We got the film uncut at 18. They had to trim it for America. And it's only in recent years that they've had the minute or so that had to be cut over there, put back in for the director's cut. But that tells you a lot. The fact that even the MPAA had issue with it. But very much, they take every film seriously, comic or not. But the comic nature of the violence made it that little bit more tolerable. And in all honesty, nowadays that wouldn't be an 18. That would be 15 level of violence, because it's over the top. It's a super exaggerated, but tonally it works for the kind of film that we've got here.
Yeah, it does. And obviously. Another thing that makes the idea of humanity in RoboCop is RoboCop remembering his past life. We get to see glimpses into his life with his wife and child, but we never meet them. It's almost as if they're always out of reach when he comes back as RoboCop.
Yes,
there's a very sad scene when he walks back into his old house. It's long since been abandoned.
Oh, and the flashbacks.
And he's remembering the first time, when he walks into the house. He's remembering the time when his wife tells him he loves him. When his kid is like, "Dad, can you be like TJ Laser?" These flashbacks help really show that Alex Murphy is such a strong character, and that he is such an unequivocally good guy that he will bleed through the programming. And when we find out what Directive 4 is, which is, of course, RoboCop cannot act against anyone from an OCP, from who works for OCP. He tries to fight against that programming, and he fails, but he tries to fight against it. And it's just such a brilliant scene. And of course, one of the other themes, the major themes as well, is corporate power.
Yes.
The power of corporations. Now, this is a staple in the cyberpunk, is the power of the corporations, that the world is no longer run by the government. If there is a government there, it is just for show and tell. But it's actually the big corporations, or in this case, the corporation that makes that makes the decisions. And in this case, it's OCP, the Omni Consumer Products, who are essentially the army and the police all wrapped up into one, as well as offering other services and products as well, which we see in adverts. They've gone into healthcare with the heart adverts, a deeply cynical advert which essentially predicted things to come for America's healthcare.
Yep.
And it's Omni Consumer Products, again, harkening back to the boardroom scene with the old man and with Dick and with Bob Morton and Dick Jones. You get all you need to know about Omni Consumer Products within that scene. It is a place, it's a dog-eat-dog company where if you are weak, you will be destroyed in an instant, and only the strong survive. And Dick Jones is seen as the man to sort of beat or to avoid, where the execution of a corpo is just seen as a business expense. It is scary how soulless Omni Consumer Products is.
Yeah, in those 30 seconds, you instantly get that hatred. You want them to be taken down, and ultimately it's a machine who would go on to take them down, their own creation, who would eventually bring this corporation down in style, down in flames, dare I say. But this OCP, over the course of the film, you hate them even more, because ultimately they are responsible for provoking the riots that would dominate the third act of the movie, understaffing, underfunding the police force, Detroit police go on strike. And it's very cleverly foreshadowed as well. When we see Ed 209 get introduced, goes a throwaway line, it's like, oh yeah, you're not to go on strike because police don't strike. It's almost as if to say, subtly say to those who were nice enough to pick it up at the time, say, this is how the film's going to end, but we're not going to tell you exactly how it plays out. You have to keep watching. And this was about 25 minutes into end of the first reel of the film back in the day. So that would have been what the press got to see, like press shows and stuff. Ultimately, the way OCP are depicted, through these adverts, through these subtle moments, they are not just a villain, but they are the whole antagonist of the film, because it is the man versus the man, so to speak. And that is another one of the aspects of the film that I really like so much. It's just the way that subtle foregrounding of what is to come pays off. The narrative payoffs are just faultless. There is not much I can fault at all with this movie.
Yeah, well, it like you say, it is essentially corporations versus the humanitarians, essentially. The idea of the Souls Corporation attempting to destroy what little there is left of humanity. And this can be seen in the old man's dream of Delta City, the safest place on Earth, where he wishes to build upon this brilliant new city and erase basically Detroit, which is obviously got its own history and its own culture, etc., which is slowly being eroded. It's a massive, massive attack on sort of corporate power. The old man himself, I think what makes this even better is the old man himself isn't necessarily an evil person. We don't see him do evil things, but he does seem, he just seems very ignorant of the world around him. And he's a really interesting character, because he's not the villain of the story. The villain of the story, obviously, is Dick Jones, who is, wanting to reach to the top and wants to get his own way, and he's willing to kill to get it. But where am I going with this? But I love the old man as a character. I really do. We've also got as well performances from Kurtwood Smith as Clarence Bodiger, who's the crime lord in league with Dick Jones. Such a brilliant performance from him. As this crazy crime lord who is the reason for RoboCop for Alex Murphy's execution and RoboCop's resurrection. And yeah, I mean, what more can we say about this movie? It's just fantastic.
Now, one of the things we like to mention on this podcast has become like a running thing. We mentioned it in Karate Kid. Is directors making cameos in their own films. Verhoeven himself popped up dancing in a nightclub. So I love it when directors make subtle cameos that don't make much of an impact in terms of the story. Shyamalan. But the fact that Verhoeven felt comfortable enough to appear in his own film, even with his issues with the script, and it took him years to sign up, I think this was a movie that he might not have agreed with it at first, but his vision for the film benefited it big time.
Yeah, and it spawned a franchise. There were 2 sequels, RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3. There was an animated children's series, multiple live-action shows, video games, comic books, toys, clothing. There was a reboot of RoboCop in 2014, which is easily forgettable.
Yep.
There is a direct sequel called RoboCop Returns in development as of 2020. It's meant to ignore the other entries in the series. How that's going at the moment, I don't know.
I'm trying to find the details. Neil Blomkamp was to direct. He exited the project in 2019. There is a director attached, but they've not really announced much in terms of detail. I think it might be one of the first major projects. Now that Orion Pictures, who were the distributors for RoboCop back in the day, now that they're backing up and running thanks to Bill and Ted Face the Music, I think it might be one of the first productions that they get mounted once COVID restrictions are relaxed enough to do prosthetics and practical effects to the point where they were able to do it individual. Because if you're going to do RoboCop nowadays, you have to do it by the book, i.e. not much in terms of CGI, honour the legacy of the original, and importantly the fact that Blomkamp was involved at one point. That's an encouraging little sign. But RoboCop 2, RoboCop 3, I think with those particular 2 films, from what I've read, that particular trilogy for RoboCop fans is cut, print, don't touch it anymore, this is the holy grail.
No. RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3 have a very interesting story in that they were written by Hollywood's least favourite crazy person, Frank Miller.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Hollywood at the time. RoboCop 2, from what I've watched of it, is okay. It's not as good as RoboCop in that RoboCop 2 has several themes in it that it tries to fully realise, but it sort of clashes. Whereas the themes in RoboCop 1 are fully realised and they're able to go through the movie quite quickly, at a reasonable pace. With RoboCop 2, they kind of finish with RoboCop's story halfway through and they don't know what they're doing.
Well, there's a good reason why RoboCop 2 finishes like that. Just as they were entering production, the Writers Guild of America went on strike, and the original writers were fired because the studio did not like what was coming out, and that's where Frank Miller came in.
Oh dear. Well, RoboCop 3 was where everything went completely tits up for RoboCop. It was a critical failure. They replaced Peter Weller, who didn't want to appear in the movie, with somebody else.
It was I believe it was Robert Burke who had to fill in for that one, and
Nancy Allen, who played RoboCop's partner, and Lewis, insisted that she die in this movie, and she died early on, and the movie didn't suffer as a result of it. It was a terrible movie. It was PG-13 instead of the rated R, and it flopped. And at that point, we also got a TV show which was okay-ish. There were also some direct-to-video series of movies that were released called the RoboCop Prime Directives, which was about RoboCop in the future where he's obsolete and what happens when a man like that machine becomes obsolete like that. Those were okay, but generally speaking, it's never got better than RoboCop the movie. Never.
Yeah, but from what you've just said, I'm glad I only bothered with RoboCop 1 because
I can't remember. I think I've watched RoboCop 2 ages ago, but RoboCop 3 I've never watched. I didn't need to watch it. I've watched clips of it, and it's just like, oh god, no.
I mean, based on the fact that it did $43 million from a $22 million budget, that and even in the 90s, that would to equate for marketing, PR, you'd have to double the budget of the film. Yeah, it didn't look nice at the box office, and the reviews have kind of put me off watching it as well. I mean, I might review it for Talking Smit about a film in the future, we never know. But again, after direct-to-video, we got the Jose Padilla reboot in 2014, and importantly, this is where there was a lot of people thinking that Joel Kinnaman coming in to remake it, and with a cast like that, it would be a good film, but ultimately, as we have joked about a few times, it turned out to be another quite forgettable RoboCop movie.
Yeah, it's not the worst RoboCop movie. It was okay. It was directed by Jose Padilla. And the thing about RoboCop with remakes is that you don't want to make a shot-for-shot remake of a movie because otherwise you just watch. Why don't you just watch the original movie? You need to introduce something new to the remake, whether it's a new direction or a retelling of the story from different events. And I respect that Jose Padilla, the director, tried to do this. However, a lot of the problems I had with the movie RoboCop, the reboot, is that it spoon feeds us what the messages are. And the thing is, RoboCop, the original, was not afraid of letting the audience follow the breadcrumbs, so to speak, and come up with their own conclusions. It is a movie that required discussion. And it was also a movie where actually if you didn't know about what the themes were, you could just sit back and watch the glorious violence and the story. You don't get that with the 2014 RoboCop at all. It's a shame because it's, first off, it's again PG-13, which is like, well, why? Part of what makes RoboCop amazing is the violence, the cartoony violence. You know, the scene where one of the criminals is coming out of the back of the van after it's crashing into toxic waste is so unbelievably comic. And then the ensuing death scene, it's like it's ripped straight from a comic book. And that's RoboCop's violence. It's ripped straight from a comic book. There's nothing serious about the violence at all. But with RoboCop 2014, it was a 12A in the UK, which should tell you everything. You know, the violence in this was negligible. And it was just a forgettable movie.
I mean, I remember when the film came out. I remember when because 2014 was when I went weekly at that cinema, and I remember when RoboCop 2014 hit cinema, and everyone was thinking, will it work? Will it not work? And ultimately, it didn't. I mean, out of 12, and to get 48% on Rotten Tomatoes, and yeah, just looking at some of these reviews here, it feels like it's a pale imitation of the original. And people look back on both films. You got the original from '87 and 2014, and they are light years apart. And with everything that's been said about 2014, it just reeks of studio interference. And well, I'm not surprised. Sony were involved. But importantly, with the '87 original, it still holds up incredibly well. All these years later, it doesn't feel like a film that was made in the '80s. There are elements that feel like it was made in the '80s, but the themes have really stood the test of time. The way it's been put together, in the hands of a capable filmmaker, you could have some really good fun building upon the universe. But ultimately, no one's really perfected the formula aside from Verhoeven and the original writers of how to make a really damn good RoboCop film. And it's a shame, really, because you can really build upon this solid foundation and continue the Alex Murphy story as he finds out more about his life. And obviously, it won't be the same without Peter Weller, because he'd be a little bit too old to play the role nowadays. But if they could integrate it somehow and get well involved with a reboot, should it ever happen, that I would be down for that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this, one day we will have a return to form for RoboCop Returns. I think that the Prime Directives, which was the movie which essentially turned into a TV miniseries, it did well in going back to the dark, gritty roots, the dark, violent roots, I should say. But it was still there. I think I don't know. I'm just going to enjoy the original, and that's that.
Yeah, I mean that original is. I can see, having now watched it myself, I can see why people regard it very highly. I mean, it might be... So some people think it's 80s cheese, and a lot of people like 80s cheese. But ultimately, what made this film so work is it's the violence. It pushed boundaries for Hollywood at the time, because back then, the MPAA was still running a roost on what you can and can't do at NC-17. Obviously, it was cut for America, but America, it didn't really matter because it would make a bucket load of money, which, again, was good for Orion and MGM at the time. The Peace of Oil performance obviously nailed the role, because you have those two sides. You got that human Murphy, which the soul of the character. Then once he's in the suit, as we've mentioned, finding himself over the course of the film. And then I think one of the more pivotal scenes for me, where he really nails the whole RoboCop subversive nature, when he goes into the police station, goes into off-limits areas, logs into that computer, finds out about the guy who killed him, and then finds the file for Murphy himself on the police record system, and then he finds out about more details about his own death. That is where that key theme of humanity really comes into roost again, because it's at that moment when he realises, right, I have a past. This is how it all played out. This is how I'm going to go and get my revenge, and this is how I'm going to ultimately live again. That is the moment. Yep. That is the moment where, even though he's had all the genetic engineering and the programming done to him, this is the moment where RoboCop becomes Alex Murphy again. And that is just a subtle way of doing it, but it just works so well.
And it's cemented at the end scene when RoboCop shoots Dick Jones out of the window, and the old man asks himself, asks, "That's nice shooting, son. What's your name?" And RoboCop just discards the RoboCop identity in a sense, and just smiles and says, "Murphy." That's it. He is now Alex Murphy. He is no longer, he is no longer just a machine. He is Alex Murphy, the man.
And importantly, with that moment, just before that, he broke Directive 4, which is don't engage with the OCP, don't arrest or kill any OCP employees. Breaking Directive 4 and then coming out with the line.
He didn't break Directive 4.
It was nullified, yes.
It wasn't nullified either. It was the old man fired Dick Jones. So because he fired Dick Jones, he was no longer an employer of OCP.
Right.
Which is why Murphy goes, "Thank you."
But importantly, Directive 4 out the pan, kills OCP employees, comes out that Murphy line. He's back to being himself, but with a hell of a load more abilities, and ultimately, if they'd have continued it, he would have become one of the best officers in that force. Because who needs like a big army of officers when he got one RoboCop? And that's kind of proven quite early on in the film. When he makes his first kill in the suit, that's one of the subtle comic natures of the film, is that first kill as RoboCop, uttering the line, "Dead or alive, you're coming with me," but it turns out dead.
Yeah. But yeah, brilliant movie. Watch it again. That's brilliant. Cut, wrap, straight to print.
I mean, that, again, RoboCop is a film that it stood the test of time, and I enjoyed that. Someone's actually put on the Facebook the greatest story ever told in the Facebook comments, and I'd actually say it is one of the greatest science fiction stories committed to film, because it just works on so many levels.
Yeah, definitely. I can't see the Facebook comments, unfortunately, but it is definitely one of the best sci-fi stories out there. It is so... There's no fluff. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of movies make, is that there's too much fluff in movies, too many side plots, and with RoboCop, it's a simple. It knows what the story is. It knows how to get from A to B. Every frame has a purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, what more can you say about RoboCop? Coming at this as the first timer, watching this in the year 2021, it is a movie that, again, it just works on many levels, and the way it's directed, the way the script comes together brilliantly, and I can see the Blade Runner influences on it, because obviously the writers stuck right onto the Ridley Scott set. They had the idea and they shopped it around the studios for a few years. Ultimately, it was MGM and Orion who'd take on the script, and they were able to do it without much in terms of studio interference, which is the best kind of outcome you can want for a movie of this nature.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, sure, there were some difficulties on set, getting to know the suit, difficulties within the filming, tensions between Verhoeven writers and cast members, difficulty with casting as well, but ultimately the film came together, shooting in Dallas over 9 weeks, filming in temperatures of up to 46 degrees Celsius. I wouldn't be on a film set in that kind of weather, believe me. But it all came together in a way that makes it all the suffering on set worth it. We hear a lot of stories coming out of film sets about tense environments, about weather difficulties, about lighting difficulties, location difficulties even. But for everything that they went through making RoboCop happen back in 1987, I'm really glad this movie got made, because it kickstarted a brand new era within Hollywood. It was one of the first movies to make the cyberpunk ideologies feel cool within cinema and society as a whole. And I mean, I know cyberpunk has had a bit of a bad rep lately, especially thanks to a certain video game, but importantly, it paved the way for more gritty cyberpunk-esque things within Hollywood as a whole, and as a result, I mean, Frank Miller got involved quite late on in the franchise, and he'd redeem himself quite later on in his career with Mad Max Fury Road. I know that film has issues and everything about it, but importantly, this was a film that gave Hollywood the impetus to start thinking of new ideas. It made intelligent science fiction possible. It made intelligent science fiction feasible, because they knew it would bring in the crowds, get box office profits, and importantly set into motion production on a lot of other movies, and importantly riding off the coattails of Blade Runner, which came out a few years prior. That really helped it as well. It's one of the first movies that really capitalised on the back of what Ridley did in 82 with that original Blade Runner film. It is a film. RoboCop is a film that changed cinema for the better, and if only more people got to watch this film and see it for what it is, a game-changing movie that rightly belongs on the big screen. Definitely.
Although I would like to point out something. You said Frank Miller gave us Mad Max Fury Road. That's George Miller.
Oh yeah, it's been a long week. Frank Miller, Sin City. Sin City. It came to me.
Frank Miller gave us Sin City, and then he sort of completely destroyed his career again.
Yeah, I mean, anything after Sin City, Dame to Kill For is I've had many interviews over the last 24 hours. My brain's been frazzled.
Don't you worry about it, mate. But brilliant movie. Cut, wrap, straight to print. Done. What's next?
Brilliant. Right, well, what's next? Over the weekend, we mentioned it during our Karate Kid episodes. We mentioned work of one Elizabeth Shue, and that prompted me to have another little look at the Back to the Future trilogy. And that is a movie. That is a movie, a trilogy that I hold so dearly to my heart, to a point where I've literally already prepared the show and everything. So next week, on the Rip Ticket review, we'll be looking at Back to the Future as a trilogy, and why, even after 35 years, 40 years on from the release of the trilogy, it is just such a great movie. I mean, to think that 30 years ago, Back to the Future 3 had just come out in cinemas and people were still watching it for what it was. And it's even a musical now. And if it wasn't for COVID, the Back to the Future musical would be playing in the West End right now.
I can't imagine it as a musical. I really can't.
Well, we'll discuss it a lot more next week, but the original writers were involved, and they've devoutly said that they are never going to authorise a remake. As long as they are alive, they will not let a remake happen.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's fair. But yeah, we'll talk about that next week, I guess.
Yeah, and importantly, it means I have an excuse to talk to my old mate Ed Greenberg, because that's one of his favourite movies. But that is next week here on Facebook and YouTube. Of course, we are simulcasting every episode of a Rip Ticket Review live when it airs, either on a Monday or a Tuesday, depends on what's happening in real life, but we will keep you all updated on social media as to exactly when we are on air. Facebook.com/Rip Ticket Show, Twitter.com/Ripped_Ticket. For our podcast listeners, if you're missing out, if you're not watching live, we stream the show every Monday from 3 p.m. Before it goes out on all major podcast platforms, on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify. And I'm 3 episodes in, and I think we've already outdone ourselves in terms of the topics this time around. I'm like, it's great to have this podcast back, and
I'm really glad, man. Really glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah, well, the fact that we've got 70 subscribers on the YouTube channel tells you a lot, really. But yep, that is it for this week's Rip Ticket Review. We'll be back potentially next Monday from 3 o'clock for a delve into the world of Back to the Future. But until then, my name's been Jack Smit.
I've been Dan Carver.
This has been the Rip Ticket Review. Until next week, we'll see you at the movies.
Bye.